With 15 World Championships to his name, Toto Wolff has a Hall of Fame F1 career. As someone who has presided over the longest dominant period in the history of Formula One, he is going to go down as one of the legends of the sport. However, with the way he's tackled the entire situation when it comes to the driver contracts that involve George Russell and potentially Max Verstappen, the 2026 F1 season is going to play a major role in what Toto Wolff's legacy is going to be in Formula One. Here's why. So first of all, when we talk about the entire situation, what has become clear is Toto Wolff is willing to use George Russell as potentially a guinea pig if Max Verstappen becomes available on the market. There is literally no secret in Toto Wolff's intentions and his pretty much desperation to bring Max Verstappen to Mercedes. And to do that, if he has to let George Russell go or maybe make him feel unwanted, he's willing to take that risk. Now, for the 2026 F1 season, what he's done is he's essentially put George Russell on a 1+1 contract, and what Toto essentially wants is find a path for Max Verstappen to Mercedes in 2027. Now, next season the regulations change. There's going to be a new power unit, and there's going to be a different aerodynamic regulations. Now, while that is the case, it also appears that Mercedes has, according to reports and rumors, they have nailed the power unit regulations once again. The last time they did so was in 2014, and they went on to win the World Championship 8 consecutive times. Now all of this is fine and it works, no issues. There's however one major problem, and the problem lies with the fact that when we are heading into a new set of regulations, there are 4 different scenarios that could potentially take place. And that is precisely why I say that the 2026 F1 regulation and how Mercedes fares in these regulations, they can define Toto Wolff's legacy in Formula One. So let's take a look at these 4 scenarios and how they are going to play a role in both Mercedes' future and Toto's legacy. So when we talk about the 2026 regulation and Mercedes, the first scenario that comes to mind is, well, the power unit is the benchmark in Formula One and the car is brilliant. Now in that particular scenario, this is probably the golden scenario for Toto. In that scenario, what's going to happen is there's going to be a title battle that's going to involve George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. One of the 2 drivers is going to win. Probably George, he's the more experienced and he's closer to his peak. So yeah, it's easier to pick the British driver over the young Italian. While that is the case, the best power unit, the best car, and you have the best package. And that is probably the perfect scenario to bring Max Verstappen to the team, because even he would be unable to say no in such a scenario. So yes, the first scenario is probably the perfect one for Toto, because if both the car and the power unit, they are nailed, it's perfect for him to bring Max Verstappen in his prime to his team and go on another dominant run. Now this is the golden and perfect scenario, and it seems Toto has bet the house on this scenario, and that is what he thinks is going to happen. However, there are other possible scenarios as well. Let's take a look at the second scenario. And the second scenario is where the power unit is great, but the car is woeful. Now, people forget, from 2022 to 2025, the Mercedes power unit has never been the problem. It is still the benchmark. The team that has won the Constructors' Championship this season, it has a Mercedes power unit. The problem, it's the aerodynamic side of the team. The team from 2022 to 2025, it has won a few races. But every time it has won a race, it has no idea why it won that particular race. It's completely clueless. That's the reality right now. Even the race in Singapore, Mercedes won the race in Singapore, but it has no clue why it won. And that's a major problem when it comes to a team that is going into a new regulation. Not talking about this scenario, Mercedes has a brilliant power unit but a woeful car. First of all, Max Verstappen is not coming in any which way, because what Mercedes has shown at this stage is they don't know how to build a good car. At the same time, however, Mercedes has lost the trust of George Russell as well. George Russell is leaving the team. By the end of 2026, there is a possibility that Toto Wolff would be looking at a scenario where Mercedes has a 20-year-old young bright star in Kimi Antonelli, but Max Verstappen has said no, and George Russell is gone. And that's not an ideal scenario in any which way. Now let's take a look at the third scenario. In the third scenario, we have Mercedes once again building a strong power unit, the benchmark in F1. However, McLaren steal the march when it comes to building a stronger car. And once again, you have Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri fighting for the title. Once again, this is a scenario where why would Max Verstappen even want to go to Mercedes? Why would he rather not go to McLaren? At the same time, George Russell, who is on a 1+1, he's not going to stick it out with Mercedes anymore. In any which way, he knows that he's not the preferred son at Mercedes. So if the option arises, he either moves to a Ferrari or an Aston Martin or any other team that has better prospects or are willing to value him the way Mercedes is not. Now, while we've talked about the 3 scenarios, let's talk about the worst possible scenario. Well, that scenario is where the Mercedes power unit is not good enough. At the same time, the car just cannot make up for the deficit. Now, this is a scenario where Mercedes in itself becomes one of the least favorable places to be. Max Verstappen is not coming, George Russell is leaving. Again, it's highly unlikely that this is going to happen because the rumors and the suggestions are quite strong that Mercedes has a strong power unit. But in case it happens, Toto is in deep trouble. Ultimately, what comes out when we analyze all these scenarios is that unless you have the first scenario where you have the strong power unit and a strong car that is capable of winning the championship, Toto Wolff is in trouble. And Mercedes ends up with a scenario where Max has said no and George Russell is left. In that particular scenario, Toto Wolff is going to be questioned because even though, okay, let's be fair, the Mercedes power unit department, the Mercedes HPP, Toto Wolff does not control that. It's not something that comes under Toto Wolff. It's handled by Hywell Thomas. What Toto Wolff controls is the Mercedes racing team. And when it comes to him, the entire focus is about building the best possible car and running the team as efficiently as possible and having the best drivers in the team. And unless Toto Wolff fulfills the first scenario where you have the best possible car and the best possible power unit, he is in trouble because, first of all, it's not only about Max not coming to the team, it's also about George Russell being pushed out. And if that happens, the board is going to question Toto Wolff's approach with the drivers. Secondly, what's also going to be questioned is how Toto Wolff is unable to turn the team around after an entire regulation where Mercedes failed. Now let's get one thing straight. Mercedes going into 26 is almost in a must-win situation. Toto Wolff cannot afford another regulation that begins with a disappointment because 22 to 25, they've been bad. They've been pretty poor when it comes to Mercedes standards. And 2026 cannot be anything close to that. Even though Toto is a part owner, he owns 33% of Mercedes, even then he is answerable to a board. And if you have another regulation that begins with a failure, the questions are going to increase. Finally, remember I talked about legacy? This is where the question of legacy comes in as well, because if you remember correctly, I specifically mentioned that Toto Wolff joined Mercedes in 2013, he took over in 2014, and he presided over and led Mercedes winning from 2014 till 2021. Now, while he did lead the team from 2014 to 2021, it was not a team that Toto Wolff had built. It was a team whose foundations were built by Ross Brawn and some assistance from Michael Schumacher as well. That was the team that ultimately Toto Wolff led and managed and took to 8 consecutive titles. Now, while his managerial and leadership abilities they should be commended for sure, there's also a question that needs to be raised. And that question would be specifically raised if Mercedes is not in a strong position in 2026. And the question would be, Toto Wolff essentially benefited from Ross Brawn's hard labor? Was that the case? Because from 2010 to 2013, Ross Brawn builds the team. In 2014, Toto comes in and takes over. And Ross is basically pushed out. Once this happens, everyone knows that the work when it comes to building a Formula 1 team, it takes years. So the work has been done. What Toto does is, Toto manages things from 2014 till 2021. However, when it has come down to him to ultimately lead the team to a new regulation change, he failed spectacularly in 2022 and he has been failing until 2025. If Toto Wolff fails again in 2026, that is going to hurt his legacy. The detractors and critiques, they've always had one major question about Toto Wolff, and the question has been the ability to lead the team to the top. 2026 is a year where Toto Wolff can define his legacy and ultimately take Mercedes to a dream era once again, this time being led by Max Verstappen. Or on the other hand, if things fall apart and if the gamble doesn't work, there are going to be serious questions asked about Toto's legacy. He's put his entire legacy in Formula 1 at stake with the way he's managed the George Russell driver negotiations, and how Mercedes performs in 2026, they're going to make him either look like a hero or have serious questions raised about him and possibly his future as the Mercedes team boss. So yeah, that's my view on the whole thing. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching and see you next time.